Hello, my guest today in Sounds Natural is a man who's been an architect in the entertainment world for, what is it, half a century? If he sang a song one way, well, that's the way the song was always sung. Anyone who thought they could sing or croon tried to sing like him. The man we all know with very great affection as the Old Groaner.
Thank you, Derek. Very nice to be here and have an opportunity to talk to the listeners of Sounds Natural. Incidentally, I think that's a marvelous title for a program such as the one that you do, Sounds Natural. That's great.
Thank you very much. Well, you know, I'd have hardly thought, Bing, that you'd have very much time for anything else, golf apart, except work.
Well, I don't do much work anymore, Derek. I just happened to count up last year. I worked about 95 days out of 365. Now, you wouldn't call that a concerted work program, would you?
It's not bad. Look, how wide is your interest in the wild world around you?
Well, I say it's limitless, really. When I was a boy, I was raised up in Spokane, Washington, which is up in the northwest and very near Canada, and lots of lakes, lots of streams, lots of woods and mountains, and it was a typical country where a young boy growing up would have to take an interest in what was there and how they were behaving and what you had to do to catch a fish or whatever.
Catch a fish. Now, was that your first interest, fishing?
Yeah, my father was an angler, and I used to go with him and carry his creel or whatever, and once in a while he'd let me catch a fish. He'd put a worm on for me, but he was a fly fisherman.
Did you see much wildlife apart from the fish?
Oh, yes, we saw a lot of wildlife in those days. I'm talking about 1915, 1916. The Northwest was not too developed then. The encroachment of civilization hadn't really begun to be apparent in Spokane, Washington. It's right near Idaho, if you know of those states. You know, that's mountainous and lots of water. I think Spokane, there are probably 30 lakes within a radius of 25 miles of Spokane, where I grew up. And the Spokane River runs right through the town. It's a big river, and it has numerous tributaries and streams that empty into it from the mountains. Really an ideal area for the kind of things that your program is concerned with.
Give me some examples of the sort of thing you might have expected to see in those days.
Deer, lots of deer, bobcat.
What sort of deer, first of all?
Well, they're mostly whitetail, some mule deer. Not too many mule deer up in that area, but a few. The mule deer, of course, are a lot bigger than the white-tailed deer, and lots of them. Some elk. I don't think there's many elk around there now unless they're in preserves. Of course, we had gophers and squirrels and badgers, lots of badgers, but lots of black bears. And black bears just mostly berries, and I don't think they fish a little for trout, salmon up in those streams. There were some of those streams where salmon come up the Columbia River, which empties into the Pacific Ocean, and then they go up into the rivers up into Okanagan and Chewelah and Cheney and those Indian towns up near the Canadian border, not too far from Spokane.
Let's go back to the angling. This was obviously your introduction, as it were, to the world around you. It gave you a chance to study some birds as well, I imagine.
Oh, of course, the country up there is full of birds. Robins, bluebirds, jays, cardinals, wrens, every bird that you can think of.
Which bird to you means the sort of magic of the great outside when you're out on an angling trip, if you hear a particular bird?
A loon, seldom see them, and they're generally on the lakes up in the Northwest. I suppose they have them up in some of the lakes in Wisconsin and Minnesota, too. But I know they're definitely to be found in all the northwestern lakes and in the Canadian lakes. I don't think they get up into the higher latitudes. And it's an eerie sound. It's only at night. They come at night, and they're harmless. They're nothing. But it's at night on a lake when there's no moon, and you hear this ooh, ooh. It's a real lonely, eerie sound, and especially from a bird that I don't recall ever seeing one.
The loon, that's the great northern diver. What else from the...
Well, the honker is a great sound, the Canadian honker. because they talk all the time when they're in flight, particularly when they're migrating or in passage. But even when they're coming into a blind, you know, if you've got I guess you call it a hide here, don't you? Yeah. We call it a blind. They're talking all the time. I mean, it seems to be one that out-talks all the other. He's the leader. But I've studied them in flight, and probably what I'm telling you, you already know. But, you know, they make that V shape, and the ones in back get sort of a break because each one gets a little more protection from the wind. And I didn't know this, but they change places every so often. Another one moves up and takes the point and then goes back. And of course, you know that they're monogamous, aren't they? They're supposed to be. They never breed with anything except the original mate, unless the original mate dies, I guess. And they're very shrewd. I've spent hours and hours stalking geese, crawling on my belly, and finally get within range only to prove fruitless that he's up and away. They always leave a sentinel when they're feeding, because in the West, in California, and up in Canada, they'll feed way out in the middle of a field where it's open all around them, and they'll leave one sentinel, and the rest of them will feed. And they're talking all the time when they're feeding. They must have some way of communicating. It must mean something to them. Very shrewd, very smart bird. Smartest I've ever seen. A lot of birds are dumb. I think a duck is not very bright.
A duck?
No.
Which sort of duck do you mean particularly?
Well, we shoot mostly mallards, pintail. You call them pintail here?
That's right.
We call them sprig in California. Pintail, widgeon. Widgeon is not considered a top duck to shoot or for the table. Teal. I love to shoot teal. We have three varieties in California: the blue wing, the green wing, and the cinnamon. Occasional gadwall. We have quite a few gadwall, canvas back. The canvas back are semi-protected now. You're only allowed one or two a day. Some areas, none.
What's the canvas back look like?
Looks a great deal like a mallard, only like his name is on the back, looks like a couple of pieces of canvas. He's a big duck. He's as big as a mallard. Wonderful eating, wonderful duck to shoot, except they do dive, and if you shoot them close to the sea, they're apt to be fishy. Pretty fishy, but if you get them inland after they've been on corn or rice or grain for a while, they're very, very good to eat. But of course, the pintail I think is the best of all because they feed on rice a great deal, and in California we have tremendous rice fields, thousands and thousands of acres, and most of the duck clubs are contiguous to these rice fields. Ours is, for instance, and they'll feed on the rice in the day and then come back to the ponds at night.
Let's hear a couple of sounds of those, shall we? Shall we hear the canvas back?
The mallard is quack, 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 quack. Get my son down here, he can do them all. The pintail, it doesn't do much quack, and the hen does a little, but mostly it's a whistle. And they only really whistle in the late fall or early winter. And at the same time when they're whistling, they're getting ready to pair up, and they do all kinds of fancy maneuvers when they're flying around the duck blind or around the feeding area, the rice or the corn. They slip and they dive and they do the falling leaf and the Immelman and the rolling barrel roll and the whole thing. They seem to really be showing off the pintail. I think it's a beautiful bird. He's elegant, he's kind of simple, his coloration, as you know. There's not much, of course we have 3 or 4 varieties of geese. We got the lesser Canada, which we call specks, and the snow goose, there's lots of those. And
the snow goose is a lovely bird, isn't it?
It's a beautiful bird, and they're abundant. At certain times of the year, the goose shooting really doesn't become good in California till late December and January, but the ducks starts in middle of October.
Can you hear the snow geese coming?
Yes, if you see a couple thousand snow geese, it's deafening when they're coming into a field, because all of them are talking.
I wonder if I could ask you a serious question about this enthusiasm of yours for hunting. We call it shooting, I suppose, wildfowling, whatever. And you've indicated you've shot a fair number in your time.
That's right. Always abiding by the law.
That's all very well, but aren't you contributing to their downfall in the end?
Well, that's a belief that is really fictional, Derek. And I'll tell you why, at least as it applies in my country. The limits are so closely controlled, the laws are so rigidly enforced, that I don't know, in my recollection, which goes 45 years, I only know of 2 or 3 cases where anybody went over the limit, because the Fish and Game Department has patrolmen, and they have field glasses. They watch the duck clubs. They watch the take. They watch what you knock down pretty well. And if you're over the limit by 1 duck, you're fined $1,000. They take your gun, confiscate it, and you can't shoot again for a year, which is pretty stiff just to shoot a few extra ducks. And actually, most hunters that I know, if you shoot 7 birds, that's enough for a nice duck dinner for somebody. Who wants any more, you know? What are you going to do with them? It's just useless. I know people that break the limit. I've never been a party to any of that. I've been along with them when they did. But they're what we call market hunters. They just can't resist. They got to shoot something, and that's ridiculous. But getting back to your question, the hunters in the United States, by the fees, really support the Fish and Game Department, and the Fish and Game Department supports the waterfowl life.
Being in all the, I don't know how many songs you recorded in your lifetime, but in all those songs there are quite a number which refer to wildlife, particularly birds, aren't there?
Yeah, everybody writes about the bluebird of happiness, and the Gene Austin song, My Blue Heaven, When Whippoorwills Call. And then I made a couple of records with Johnny Mercer, Mr. Meadowlark, Mr. Meadowlark, you've got a lot of singing to do, Mr. Meadowlark.
What's the meadowlark? That's one we don't know in this country, isn't it?
Well, he's a beautiful bird. He's kind of, let me see how he's colored. And I'm colorblind, Derek. A little tough for me to identify birds like that, particularly the songbirds. So ducks I can pick out all right. But
so you have to go for the sound.
He's got a nice call too. Something like that.
I'm out in the country, but I don't know why, 'cause I'm strictly a city-loving guy. Just sitting there when a little bird flies my way.
Hello, B.
Well, dig me, Jay. I looks at him, and he's looking at me.
We're both satisfying our curiosity. Who can this be?
Quick like a rabbit, I gets me a thought. So I ups to him and I say,
What you say?
Ooh, Mr. Meadowlark, we've got an awful lot of serenading to do.
Who to?
Ooh, Mr. Meadowlark, I'm just a city slicker, and I'm counting on you. She's got a country guy who whistles. My whistle is thin. Ain't it a sin? So when I begin, that's where you come in. Oh, you're hep and you're hard, Mr. Meadowlark. Now, if you should cop a gander when I'm kissing my chick.
Look her.
You won't look.
Needless to remark, I'm gonna have the decency to exit.
Do.
But quick. Say, but what if Mrs. M thinks I'm outstepping?
Fear not, I'll make it all right.
Well, all right.
Oh, Mr. Meadowlark, meet me in the dark tonight.
The idea was you got to come and sing to my love, one of those things. And then the other song was Bob White.
Bob White, now what's that?
That was a record I made with Connie Boswell, and that's a quail. But the Bob White, he has a very distinctive whistle.
Talking to the whippoorwill, he says you got a corny trill. Bob White,
I'm gonna swing tonight.
I was talking to the mockingbird, he says you are the worst he's heard. Bob White,
I'm gonna swing tonight.
even the owl tells me you're foul, singing those lullaby notes.
Well, he's a bring down, he never could swing down. He ain't got my high notes.
There's a lot of talk about you, Bob.
Yeah?
They're saying you're off the car.
Why, that's heresy. I'll sue.
Fake it,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. B.
Here I go.
Take it, follow me, Bob White.
We're gonna break it up
tonight.
Fantastic. The Bob White call actually appears in the song.
And of course, you raise a covey of quail and split them up by a shot, and they land in different areas in singles, and then they'll start calling to get together again, you know. And they'll call and call till they all wind up together.
What about whippoorwill?
Whippoorwill. Well, he makes it sound something like his name, doesn't he? Something like that.
Onomatopoeic.
I must tell you this. You know, when you name a racehorse, a thoroughbred racehorse, you have to apply to the Jockey Club in the United States, and you submit a variety of names. And generally, you try to get a name that has something to do with the name of the sire of the horse, or maybe a coupling of the names of the sire and the dam. To give you an illustration, everybody tries to get something clever. I knew a fellow, he had a horse, the sire's name was Haste. The mother's name was Perseverance. He called the horse Hard At It, which I thought was very good. And then I named a horse once for a woman friend of mine, Mrs. Whitney. He was by Your Host out of Wisteria. I called him Social Climber, which, you know, you try and do something like that. So I had a horse by Seabird, who was a brilliant horse in America. Racegoers in England will remember him. He was a brilliant horse in England. And so I tried to get something of name of Seabird, like a osprey, or there's so many, albatross, anything. I sent in name after name. You can't use any name that's ever been used. And I think they play games with me. The lady of the Jockey Club just wants to see my signature or something. Because I know these names were available. They have a giant book that shows you what's been used, and they weren't in the book. And I named birds from Africa that I knew down there. When I was down there, and I had the bird book with me, and I would see these birds in real exotic, unusual names. And no chance. So the hunter was a hunter with the name Bill Ryan. He was a great punster, and he told me a pun involved these two British waterfowlers who were out on the marsh shooting waterfowl. You may have heard this story. And the shooting was a little dull. There hadn't been anything come over. And a flock of terns came by. And one of the hunters picked up a bunch of big stones and started throwing them at the terns. And his companion said, "Whatever are you doing? Are you mad? What are you doing that for?" He said, "Well, my father told me to never leave a tern unstoned." So I sent in the name Tern Unstoned just for a gag. I didn't think they'd ever take it. They accepted it, and now I'm trying to get rid of it because I know 1,001 people are going to say, "Where in the hell did you get that name for the horse?" And I'm going to have to tell the joke. It's going to take up an awful lot of time. I asked if I could change it. They said you could indeed for $100. So I'm not going to spend $100, so the poor horse is stuck with that very unusual name. But I know she was just teasing me because I said name after name in bunches of 12, you know. Birds I know nobody had ever heard of. So I finally thought I'd fool her and give her one that she'd really have to putt, and she took it.
That's the price you have to pay for
Trying to be funny.
And for being a famous racehorse owner.
I guess so. But we all try to get clever names, like a horse by Royal Minstrel out of Glade, they call it Singing Wood. They make marvelous names. Some of these, Jock Whitney's very good at it.
I thought you
and
might
his
have
mother
had
was
some-
tremendous at it.
Some help from Hope, possibly.
Well, no, his names you couldn't use because anything obscene or lascivious or lewd is turned down immediately. Can't, and anything, he'd want to get something advertising, a picture of his, and anything commercial is frowned upon.
Talking of pictures, all these splendid road films you've made with Hope and Dottie L'Amour over the years, it must have taken you to parts of the world and given you a chance to see some wildlife in your travels?
Well, you know, we made all those pictures right in the studio, Derek. We never left town. But I've been all over. I have been in different areas. I've hunted in South America, all over Canada, Alaska, United States, practically every state in the United States, all over Mexico, Africa, of course. I fished in England, made a film in England on salmon, and the River Derwent up in Cumberland. It was Lord Egremmont's water, and he let the ABC network go up there and film this salmon film. It rained like hell, and I must have made 9,000 casts to get 3 or 4 salmon just for the picture.
Well, at least you got them.
Yeah, but we worked, I'm telling you, it was 6 or 7 days just cast. You know how many casts you make when you fish from dawn till, and you know we had the long summer twilight evening, and of course the producer just kept us out there on that river. And I finally caught one, a very good fish. Fought him for quite a while and got him to the bank, and of course the camera's working and everything's fine. And I got him right up to the bank and about ready to put the noose around his tail, and the cameraman says, "Cut, I got to reload. How can you hold him there?" Well, you know, holding, if this salmon was about 30 pounds, I guess, 25 anyhow. I said, "I'll try, but I don't know." He said, "Just hold him there and I'll reload." Well, you know what happened? The salmon got away, of course, he started thrashing around, and we couldn't get the loop around his tail, and away he went. Then it was another 3 days before we even got another salmon. Frustrating. I can't blame the cameraman. He was out of film.
Bing Crosby, thank you. And I think
Thank you, Derek.
I think we'll leave you by listening to that song you made with Satchmo.
Gone fishing. That's a good number, isn't it?
Bing, thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you a lot, Derek.